American rootstock down here. That little bit there is the European style vine that you want to grow. So you don't need much of it at all. It's amazing how it actually does grow. And can anyone tell me that variety? Because I know what it is. Can you tell? No? It's Bacchus. And do you know how I know? It's dead easy. You'll be surprised. It's on the label there. It says Bacchus. It's the only way you can tell. Right, this is what we call the press room. What happens at harvest time from all our sites, they pick during the day, and in the afternoon they transport the grapes down here and we press them overnight. We want them really fresh to press them. On this site we've got 4 presses, 5 presses. One's in the shed next door, and that's the smallest one we've got, which is a 3.5 ton press. And that one there's a 7.5 ton press. And these 3 here are 11.5 ton presses. And I'd like to welcome this one, which only arrived on Thursday. It's never been used, as you can see, brand new. And so these presses sit here for 10.5 months of the year doing absolutely nothing, apart from being maintained and looked after and cherished. Because you can't rent them. When it comes to harvest, you need them, and there's nothing you can do. It's as simple as that. These are called horizontal presses. You might have seen in pictures of small vineyards where they have vertical presses, which is like a screw thing that they press down and wooden frames around it, that's juice come rippling out. Well, obviously, on the scale of things here, we have to do it a different way. How these work is that at harvest, we'll bring the grapes in. I'm going to talk about white wine production first of all. We do what's called whole bunch pressing. We take the grapes, and you can see the doors on the press there. They slide open, and that whole drum can turn round as well. And then we can put the grapes in through the hopper at the top, and then fill the tank up inside of the press. Now, inside the press is there's a stainless steel drum that's got holes in it, and inside of that is like a big balloon, a rubberized cotton balloon. And we put the bunches in, and then we press the button that starts the machine, and it goes through 3 cycles of pressing. First pressing, second pressing, and what we call the tail, T-A-I-L-L-E. And the whole sequence of 3 pressings can take about 4 hours. It's extremely gentle, and the reason it's gentle is we don't want this juice to have a lot of contact with the skin of the grapes, because 1, it will give it coloration, and we want white wine, and 2, it will give it a lot of tannins, which in the white wine we don't want. So, we start the pressing motion, the balloon inflates, presses the grapes against the side of the drum, it also rotates, and then it takes the pressure off and go back on again, very gently, and start rotating. Eventually it will crack the skins and the juice will start to flow. We collect the juice in these receivers like that, underneath. The first thing the winemaker would do with the juice is to add a little sulphite to it. And the reason for that is to stop the juice oxidizing. Because if it oxidizes, it could convert to acetic acid, which is vinegar, which is only good for fish and chips and not good for drinking. And the second thing the winemaker will probably do is to kill off any yeasts. The grapes pick up yeast from the environment they're in the fields. But these yeasts, if we use them for fermentation, they could be a little unstable. So we tend to use, for large quantities of wine, we tend to use commercial yeast that we know will do the job. Not always. On our premium wines, we do it another. We use the natural yeast, but I'll come on to that. So, we start collecting the juice. The first juices that come out are called the cuvée. You've probably seen it in bottled wine, Premier Cuvée, the first juices. That's deemed to be the best part of the pressing. And we collect that, and technically speaking, it's the first 510 litres of juice per tonne of grapes that you put in the press. And we'll collect that out, and we'll separate that and use that separately, because we use that for making our vintage sparkling wine. And then we go into the second pressing, which is the next 110 litres of juice per tonne of grapes. And then we'll use that for our non-vintage sparkling wines and what we call reserve wines. And then we go into the third pressing, the tail, and we press and press and press as much as we can, and we'll use that for our still wines. And then when we've finished all that pressing, in the case of our Bacchus grapes, we'll take the bunches out of the press and we'll put it into a fermentation tank and we'll ferment that and make a sort of grappa out of it. We'll combine it with wheat spirit, and then we'll do a distillation with it, and we'll add botanical elements to it, and that's how we make our Bacchus gin. And we do the same with our Pinot Noir grapes, and that's how we make our pink gin, Pinot Noir gin. And with our Chardonnay, we do the same, but we don't add botanical elements, and we put it in a different type of still, and we make our Chardonnay vodka. So there's not a lot of wastage in the whole thing. And some great products along the route as well. So now we've got our juice. So we collected our juice, then what we do is we put it into one of our fermentation tanks down there. Now, some of the older people will remember, or you may even remember, parents and grandparents used to make a lot of this at home. Used to make wine at home. It's in a thing called a demijohn, and they used to put it in the airing cupboard, and it would bubble away for about a month and then explode and ruin all your linen. Well, these are the same thing, but they don't explode. So we'll fill it up with the juice. We'll then add the yeast that we want to use, and the yeast will start eating the sugars. And as the yeast eats the sugars, that forms a chemical reaction. First of all, it will create alcohol, which is what we want, which is good. Secondly, it will create carbon dioxide, which at this stage we don't want, so we release that. And thirdly, it will create heat. Now, heat is very important in winemaking. In the case of white wine production, we do what's called a cool fermentation, and that occurs between about 12 and 20 degrees Celsius. If it's white wine production, it's a warm fermentation, and that's between about 24 and 30 degrees Celsius. So the yeast eats away at all the sugars. Eventually, the yeast eats all the sugar, and when it's eaten all the sugar, the yeast will die, and it will drop to the bottom of the tank and form a sediment, and we call that sediment the lees. Now, what we do then, we've got a tank full of wine, white wine, and some sediment in the tank, and we'll pump a whole lot from that tank and put it into our storage tanks outside, where we'll leave it for about 6 months. From our harvest, usually to around through till June, something like that. Now, it doesn't matter whether it's a red grape or a green grape. When you squeeze them, there are a couple of exceptions with red grapes, but most of them, when you squeeze them, you get a clear juice comes out. Now, we use a lot of red grapes for making white wines. In fact, we've stopped making red wines at the moment. We don't make any more at all. At the moment, we may make them again, but at the moment we don't. So that will go outside. Now we've got some white wine in our storage tanks outside. If we want to make red wine, which we're stopping, but I'll tell you anyway how it's produced, the grapes come in and we put them through a different machine, and that's called a crusher destemmer. First of all, they go into the machine, and it's got like paddles inside, and they flick the grapes from the wood of the bunch, and the machine discharges the wood, and that goes for composting. We don't want that. The grapes come down through a hopper, and they come to like 2 cylindrical drums at the bottom with like gears on them. And what they'll do is crack open the body of the red grape, and the juice will flow into a receiver like that. And the body of the grape will follow through as well. And we'll collect that, and that's called the must. And we take the must and we'll put that into a fermentation tank. Add the yeast and start the fermentation process. There are many ways of doing, but what we do to make red wine here is we do, every so many hours, we do what's called a pump through. And we pump the clear liquid from because you've got clear liquid here, and the body of the grapes will float to the top. You've got like a pancake of grapes at the top. We'll pump the clear liquid from the bottom of the tank up to the top of the tank and let it permeate through the pancake of grapes at the top. Now, if you did that for about 24 hours, that's one way of making rosé wine. But if you carry on for another week, 10 days, a fortnight, whatever, it gets more red, and you've got red wine. And we call that free run wine. And we'll take that and pump that, put it in storage tanks outside. And then what we do, we take the pancake of grapes from the fermentation tank, and we put that in a press, and then we press that. And what comes out of that's called press juice, and we'll take that and put that in a storage tank outside. Now the winemaker can either reconstitute the two back together, or use it for whatever blending purposes they like. Whatever you've done, we've now got tanks of wine sitting outside. So the difference between white wine production and red wine production, in the case of white wine production, you press the grapes before fermentation, and in red wine production, you press the grapes after fermentation. Okay. If we go outside, I'll tell you about the tanks. Because